As House Democrats move yet another step closer to impeaching Donald Trump, does the US president have any credible defense left? I'll ask one of his closest allies, the conservative media mogul who's been dubbed the Trump Whisperer. I'm Mehdi Hassan. Also on the show, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's vicious leadership of ISIL came to an end when he was killed in a US raid last weekend. So, is this the beginning of the end for ISIL, or will the ultra-violent group survive its leader's demise? That's our debate. But first, with a flurry of damning testimonies and an impeachment resolution clearing the House this week, Democrats in Congress just turned up the pressure on Donald Trump. Is there any defense, though, of Trump's now notorious phone call to the president of Ukraine, in which he asked him to dig up dirt on Joe Biden? Chris Ruddy is CEO of conservative news outlet Newsmax and is such a close friend of the president that he's become known as the Trump Whisperer. He says the whole impeachment process is a giant diversion. This week's headliner from Florida, Chris Ruddy. Chris Ruddy, thank you for joining me on UpFront. You're a close friend of Donald Trump. You speak to him quite regularly. How's Trump doing right now as he gets closer and closer to becoming only the third US president to be impeached? Judging from his Twitter feed, he seems to be cracking under the pressure.
I don't see that at all. I think that the president is a guy that likes to tell you what he thinks and how he feels. And he's been tweeting quite a bit for several years now, so I wouldn't read into any new tweets that he's doing. I think he likes, this is a guy that I always say he likes to walk on fire. He can walk on fire and not even feel it. He thrives on battle. He thrives on these political controversies. He's wired differently than most of us. I always say,
I think we can agree on that.
If there's a fire...
He's definitely wired differently.
If there's a fire, well... You know, most of us, if we see a fire, we flee from it. If we see a fight, we flee from it. He wants to run to it. He likes to address problems or tackle problems or confront issues. Not the style that maybe you and I have, but it works for him, and it's been very successful over a long period for him.
You say not to read much into his tweets. Just this week, he tweeted about the impeachment hoax in capital letters, which sounded very stable. What was the last thing the president said to you about impeachment when you last spoke to him?
Well, I don't discuss what the president tells me in private conversations, but I can tell you that we both agree that the impeachment was a political act. That this was started because the Democrats are a year away from election. They really have no candidate that can defeat him. There's only a year left. They have no evidence of a criminal act here. None.
Well, of course, impeachment is not about law or criminality. It is a political act to begin with. And you say there's no candidate who can beat him. All the polls show that all of the major Democratic candidates would beat him in an election tomorrow. Back in September, 2 days after the impeachment inquiry was announced, you said, quote, I think Nancy Pelosi is the smartest person in Washington right now. You said, quote, you're not sure this White House is prepared for this and that Trump is being dismissive of the whole process. Why? Why isn't he taking it seriously, given you've also described this process as, quote, a mortal threat and grave danger to his presidency?
I can't speak for Donald Trump, and I don't want to presume, even though we've been friends for a long time, I don't want to presume that I'm here today speaking on his behalf. I can only speak on behalf of Chris Ruddy and Newsmax, the company I represent. And,
do you, Chris Ruddy, think he's not taking it seriously?
Well, I think he believes that the best way to deal with this is how he's dealt with other controversies, to be very reactive and to comment and respond every time there's a criticism with him doing it. And he's had quite a bit of success doing that in the past.
But you think it's a mistake in this particular case? You think it's a mistake, clearly, from your comments?
Right, because it's sort of like before you've been alleged to have committed something, now you're actually on trial. You know, there's an old saying that you should never be your own lawyer, and that you'd be a fool to be your own lawyer. And I think there's a case here that, and I think the president's gotten a lot of bad legal advice from a number of people. In fact, if you look at this Ukrainian thing, a lot of it starts because his legal counsel at the time, Rudy Giuliani, told him to push this issue of corruption and investigating the Bidens. So it came from his lawyer. And I think that, the president didn't dream this up himself. And now we're dealing with this as a major political controversy and now an impeachment issue.
Let me just ask you this. According to a poll this week, only 7% of American adults think it's okay to ask a foreign government for help with a US presidential campaign. Are you one of them, Chris Ruddy?
I believe that it's inappropriate. We should not be asking foreign governments to be involved in any political campaign or anything related to a political campaign.
So when Donald Trump does that, do you think it's inappropriate that he does that?
Absolutely. I disagree. Now, I do believe that as the chief law enforcement officer in the nation, he can make a request like that. I also believe that it's not a criminal act.
Yep.
While I disagree with it and I think it's inappropriate or not proper, as some people have testified on, I agree that it's not proper and was a mistake. But I don't think it's a criminal act, and I don't think it's an impeachable act. Alan Dershowitz, a very famous liberal, has said we don't impeach people for political sins.
Yeah,
we used to not.
Many would dispute the Dershowitz liberal label, and he's been a Trump defender on Fox News for a while now. I'll come back to the impeachable versus criminal act in a moment. Just on the phone call, the Democrats are focusing their impeachment inquiry on this crucial July phone call between Donald Trump and the president of Ukraine. That was the call in which, according to the White House's own call summary, the Ukrainian president asked for military aid, and Trump replied, quote, "I would like you to do us a favor, though." And he then went on to ask the Ukrainian president to, quote, "look into former Vice President Joe Biden and his son." Trump says that phone call was, quote, "perfect." Do you think it was perfect?
I don't think anything said in that call was criminal or impeachable. I would disagree with the assessment that it was perfect.
What was wrong with it?
But it's his assessment, and he's allowed to make his assessment.
In your view, what was wrong with it?
My view on this is, and it's always been the same, I believe that you should never investigate someone unless there's an evidence of a crime. That's the due process legal system we operate under. I believe it was very wrong and unjustified for there to be a 2-year political investigation of the president on Russia because an allegation was made. I said it at the time that this was an allegation in search of a crime, and that's not the way the system should work. The president was victimized by this. Now, he is saying, hey, they went and investigated me. Why can't I investigate them when I think there is something fishy going on in Ukraine?
But what do you think was wrong with the call?
I have not seen any evidence.
I'm just asking, what do you think was wrong with the call? You say it wasn't a perfect call. What was wrong with it?
I think that Joe Biden's name should have never been raised in the call.
Why?
Because he's a political opponent of the president. He's running for office.
What's wrong with that?
There's no evidence, and as I said, there's no evidence that the Bidens committed a crime. It's unusual that his son would be running on the board of a gas company.
Yep.
But a lot of famous people have family members on boards,
including the president.
You'd have to start investigating half the Congress. So my view on the president is this is a guy that's done an A+ job running the economy and the domestic side. He's done a fantastic job on foreign policy in a lot of areas. I think the report card is yet to be completed, but it's very good.
Okay, but just coming back to the call, I appreciate you admire his record on other issues. Just on the call,
well, it's important because it plays into everything else.
Yes, but Bill Clinton had a very good other domestic record in many ways. It didn't stop people impeaching him.
He did.
But let me just ask you this.
Well, it stopped him from being acquitted, being convicted.
Okay. Whether you commit a crime or not is irrelevant to the impeachment process. But in terms of it being an impeachable offence, a high crime or misdemeanor,
well, it is because
Bill Taylor, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, said last week in testimony to Congress he thought it was totally inappropriate to tie the two things together. He says it was crazy to make U.S. military aid dependent on the Trump presidential campaign. The National Security Council's Colonel Alexander Vindman said this week in what many describe as damning testimony, he thought it was inappropriate. How is that not an impeachable offence when his own people are saying that they thought this was the wrong thing to do, to use the power of the presidency to help your own personal presidential campaign? If that's not impeachable, what is?
Colonel Vindman said that he felt the president did not act properly. He never said that he acted illegally or criminally.
Chris,
and that
it's not about criminality. I have to jump in here. We agree. We don't know whether the Trump did it.
I disagree with you.
The impeachment is not about the crime. I'm sorry to break this to you. The impeachment has nothing to do with committing a criminal offence.
No, the
Alexander Hamilton makes that clear in the founding. The Constitution is very clear that it does not require a criminal offence to be impeached. In fact, Gerald Ford once said a high crime and misdemeanor is whatever the House defines it as you know.
I hate to break the news to you, but the ultimate jurors are the American public, and they expect, I believe, and
That's
the
not
poll
true,
numbers
the House of
showing
Representatives
this,
will be voting.
if you go across the country, there's not broad-based support for this impeachment.
More Americans than not,
committed.
Chris, support removing him from office, just on a factual basis.
And then supports the argument that is. But let's go back to Colonel Vindman.
Yes.
He said that he never said the president committed crime. Ambassador Taylor never spoke to the president. He's saying that he was told by other officials there was a quid pro quo. The president has denied that he ever withheld the aid in demand for this. Now, I get you, Bill Taylor is saying that he heard from other people that said the president may have wanted this or not. That's for Congress to investigate. That's for the legal authorities to investigate. And I do think that would be very serious if that happened. The president has said he did not require a quid pro quo.
So just to be clear, Chris, for your perspective, you believe that unless the president has committed a crime, broken federal law, he cannot be impeached. That's your view.
I believe that that should be the standard.
But that isn't the standard. That wasn't the standard in the case of Bill Clinton or in Andrew Johnson, the previous two presidents who were impeached.
There's a lot of things. I think it's wonderful, Mehdi, that you're researching what the founding fathers have said, but the Constitution and the law is based on what people today say it is. And
today the House of Representatives defines high crimes and misdemeanors. If President Obama in 2012 had asked the Ukrainians to find dirt on Mitt Romney or a Romney child in exchange for U.S. military aid, do you think the Republicans would have been okay with that? They wouldn't have impeached Barack Obama? Seriously?
I don't know if they would have impeached, and it's a really big hypothetical. But
it's not a hypothetical. We know they went after Hillary Clinton on Benghazi. They talked about impeaching Hillary Clinton for Benghazi.
One of the things that the Trump people and the president have alleged is that Obama and his administration officials essentially asked the Ukraine to find dirt on the president's campaign manager and to drop some of those bombshells in the middle of the election. And now, we don't know if that happened or not, but they've alleged that to have happened, and that he also has alleged that he was spied on by the Obama administration or potentially foreign intelligence agencies. I don't know if that's true or not. Well, he lied about the
spying. He lied about the tapping of phones. That was a lie from the president. His own Justice Department said there was no evidence of his wires being tapped, as you know.
Well, again, I haven't investigated all of it. I'm not.
Well, it's public record. The Department of Justice says there was no tapping of his phones. That was a lie. That's why he's never repeated it since that tweet in 2017 where he made that claim.
Well, again, you should ask the White House about that.
I don't need to. The Department of Justice has said that there was no tapping of the phones. That's a fact, Chris.
Have them on the show. Great.
Okay, but you were just making a claim. I'm just correcting you. It is not correct to say that his phones were tapped.
I said that the president alleged that he was spied on, and campaign officials alleged they were spied on. I did not say whether it happened or not.
You repeated a false allegation. The problem with Donald Trump is he makes a lot of these false...
I repeated what the president has alleged.
Which is false.
I'm not saying it's true or not. I'm not agreeing.
Fine. I'm saying it's false.
I'm not sure that it's false.
Let me ask you this. You say that Trump makes allegations. Isn't the problem here is he makes so many false claims, especially in defending himself? He said that these ambassadors and people testifying in Congress, he said that they're never Trumpers. And by the way, he calls never Trumpers human scum. He says that Ambassador Bill Taylor is a never Trumper. Colonel Alexander Vindman is a never Trumper. There's zero evidence for that claim. How can you be a never Trumper if you literally work in the Trump administration?
I do not know what the president knows about those individuals, but what I know and what I've read about them are they're exemplary public officials that have dedicated their life for service to America. I'm not going to criticize them. I do know people that know Ambassador Taylor. They say he's a man of great integrity.
But they're not never Trumpers, are they?
Word.
But they're not never Trumpers. There's no evidence that they're never Trumpers.
Again, I'm not aware of what the president, but I have no evidence that they're motivated by anything by the.
So it's a false charge.
I have no evidence to accuse them of anything improper.
So Chris, Chris, we agree. You have no evidence. I have no evidence. Nobody has any evidence. When you make a claim against someone without any evidence, that's called a falsehood. Trump falsely accused them of being never Trump without any evidence.
Again, I don't know. Again, you've got to ask the president these questions because I don't know what he knows and why he's making the allegation. But from what I know, I think that they're upstanding public servants. And they saw something they didn't think was right.
But as far as you're aware, they're not never Trumpers.
again, I haven't investigated, but I haven't seen anything that would indicate to me
come on, Chris, this is a very odd defense. Anytime someone says anything, you don't have to have an investigation. If I say today you're a Democrat and you say you're not, I can say, well, I don't know, they haven't seen any evidence. That's not how it works. The burden is on me making the accusation to support my accusation. Trump doesn't do that. He falsely smears anyone he doesn't like as scum, as never-Trumpers, as deep state. That's wrong. You can say that. You don't speak for Trump. Why don't you say that's wrong?
Well, actually, I don't think he ever called them scum, but...
He called never-Trumpers scum. Hold on. No, Chris. He called never-Trumpers scum, and he called them never-Trumpers. So that by definition, he is calling them scum.
I told you that I don't agree with everything the president does or says.
That's what I'm asking.
I told you that I disagree with this particular characterization based on the information I know. And I said, if you really want to know, call the White House, ask them. I'm not their representative.
Former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly said a few days ago that he told the president before he quit the White House last year that if Trump hired a yes man as his next chief of staff, he'd end up getting impeached, which is exactly what's happening now, of course. But what does it say about this president that so many people around him speak about him and to him as if he's a child, that he needs hand-holding, he needs boundaries, he needs saving from himself? You know, he's been nicknamed the toddler-in-chief.
Well, I've always found in my conversations with him, I could be quite frank, and he does take constructive criticism. I don't work for him. I'm not there at the White House, so I'm not privy to the ongoing. I have been told by people through a number of years that people give him a lot of feedback and disagreements privately. He's very open to that privately. I think what he disagrees is where he has someone on his staff that they publicly disagree. I think any leader would have a problem with that. But I think people forget he ultimately decides all of these things, even I'm sure John Kelly gave him a lot of constructive criticism, and the president decided many times against that advice. I do think that the president is well served when he has advice and feedback. I think Congress has a vital role to play with any president.
But he doesn't just have advice and feedback. His press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, said John Kelly was, quote, totally unequipped to handle the genius of our great president. This is Chairman Kim stuff. He's surrounded by sycophants. I hope you're not one of them.
Well, I'm a friend of his. I support him. I think he's doing a great job, but I also will have disagreements with him, and I'm a member of the press, and I will share those concerns both privately and publicly.
Chris Ruddy, thanks for joining me on UpFront.
Glad to be here.
After losing all of its territory and most of its fighters, ISIL has now also lost its leader. So is the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi the final blow? Or will the weakened group manage to survive and continue to pursue its murderous enterprise? To discuss this, I'm joined by two experts in the field. Jessica Stern, a research professor at Boston University and co-author of ISIS, The State of Terror. And Hassan, a director at the Center for Global Policy and co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. Thank you both for joining me in the arena. Hassan, when Donald Trump announced Baghdadi's death on Sunday, in his usual way, he boasted about it and he claimed that he had taken down someone bigger even than Osama bin Laden. You said afterwards in an op-ed for the New York Times that Trump might be right, even if it's for the wrong reasons. For once, he might have a point. Why?
Well, because operationally, the killing of Baghdadi it can be more disruptive, far more disruptive than the killing of Osama bin Laden. Because remember, when Osama bin Laden was killed in 2011, that was 10 years after 9/11, he was already kind of far removed from the reality.
Staying in Pakistan in a compound.
Exactly. Far removed from the day-to-day reality of al-Qaeda. But he wasn't as, his killing was not as disruptive as the killing of Baghdadi today.
You're saying Baghdadi was controlling ISIS on a day-to-day basis?
He was commanding the organization very closely. He was meeting with his commanders and shaping the direction of the organization.
Jessica, you also wrote a New York Times op-ed this week, and you said that while you recognize the importance of Baghdadi to ISIL, you said, quote, jihadi leaders and even jihadi groups come and go. The US general in charge of Central Command seems to agree with you. He said this week, we don't see a bloodless future because unfortunately this ideology is going to be out there. Is this a case of an ideology being more important than the man or even the organization itself?
I think so. I mean, I do think that the killing of Baghdadi was, in fact, very significant. He was a really, truly evil man, and he killed so many people in such a gruesome, brutal way. But nonetheless, there are many groups. They keep splitting, they keep merging, and it is an ideology that has been going on for quite some time, and it apparently will continue for some time.
Hassan, you said this week that if the US and its allies failed to put pressure on ISIL now, there was, quote, a risk of ISIL quickly seizing on this vacuum in Syria and Iraq. Are you trying to say that Donald Trump should be sending more troops to Syria and Iraq rather than pulling troops out? He should be intensifying the military effort against this group?
So I am in favor of American troops staying in Syria. The whole debate about whether the Americans should stay or not should not start now. When the Americans decided to intervene on behalf of whoever in Iraq and Syria to fight this organization, the end goal should have been that after the defeat of this organization, you stay there until you make sure that it's wholly defeated, it's properly defeated, and instead of handing over these areas to the likes of Assad and so on and so forth, you make sure or you steer this situation into peace.
Jessica, how many of the socio-economic factors, the sectarian divisions that allowed ISIL to flourish in places like Iraq and Syria, how much of those factors are still around today? I mean, we have in Iraq right now protests against the government, massive corruption, security forces shooting people dead in the streets. How worried are you that the conditions are still ripe for another ISIL, for ISIL 2.0 or 3.0, however we want to define it?
I think they are ripe. I think, we know that some of the risk factors for terrorism include lots of young men who are unemployed or underemployed, sectarian tensions, sectarian conflict, sectarian war. And yes, we see that. You
used to work in government back in the day. If you were advising Donald Trump today, what would you be telling him to do?
I'm not sure we're going to be able to defeat this movement, but I do think that we do need to be very careful about how we leave. Yes, maybe we need to leave over time. We cannot solve all these problems. Clearly, we often make them worse. But if we leave in a precipitous way, leaving our allies, whom we've worked with very closely, who depended on us, completely vulnerable, that strikes me as a grave error.
Jessica just mentioned a rather depressing point there in passing, that she doesn't think a group like this, or the ideology at least underpinning the group, can ever be defeated. Do you share that view?
I think the main problem today is the conflicts. Jihadism and extremism thrive in two things: conflict and authoritarianism in the region. The problem with that is that we always go after the disease, after the symptoms, and we leave the disease. The disease is.
But others say the disease isn't just conflict; it's the ideology, it's radical Islam, to quote the President of the United States. Where do you stand on that debate?
The ideology comes after. If you're fighting someone like the regime of Bashar al-Assad or someone like Bashar al-Assad, then jihadism provides a way for recruitment, die-hard.
Justification after the fact.
Exactly, after facts. It's not before.
So you would say that dealing with the disease is dealing with the conflicts in the region?
Precisely.
Which they haven't. Jessica, would you share that view?
I do, actually. I'm very much of the view that ideology is often a branding device more than it is something emerging. It's not the reason for the problem. It is a branding for a fight that has much more to do with the underlying sectarian tensions and authoritarian regimes. What I'm suggesting, however, that I don't believe the U.S. can defeat this or fix this problem. It's quite clear that we often make things worse.
And Hassan, ISIL this week announced a new leader, a replacement for Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who they're calling the new emir, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi. What do you think his life expectancy is looking like right now?
Well, so far we don't know anything about this. That doesn't, his nickname or the kunya doesn't really narrow things down. A very small number of people know who he is. The people at the top of the helm of ISIS who selected him, I don't think anybody within or below them would know. So the Iraqis probably will take some time to know who he is, and that's when you start to trace them down.
And how worried should people at home be that in the wake of Baghdadi's death, Is it going to hurt the group and they get undermined and they kind of lose morale? Or is there a sense of, we're going to take revenge attacks, we've lost our territory, we've lost our leader, we're going to mount attacks in Paris or Colombo or New Delhi or Washington, D.C.?
I think most certainly they will try to wage a campaign of revenge. His decapitation is not the end for ISIS, obviously. The organization has been there before, twice actually, a very critical time, 2006 and 2010. And they survived it. And I think with the announcement this week of the new Emir and his spokesperson, it seems like they handled the transition very well. And it really depends on the organization itself, and whether the Americans can go after these leaders more and more and keep the pressure.
Well, on that note, we'll leave it there. Jessica Stern, Hassan, thank you both for joining me in the arena. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.